Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. It was a crisp October morning when everything I knew about my life began to crumble. I was James, 38, an IT consultant who prided himself on creating a stable, fulfilling life with Marcia, my college sweetheart. Together, we'd built a world that seemed unbreakable, or so I thought. Our two kids, Alex and Emma, were the heart of that world, and every decision I'd made for the last decade had been for them, for us. We had the house in a quiet suburb, the family trips to the coast, and the cozy Sunday dinners that seemed to confirm what I thought we both wanted, a good, solid life. But recently, something felt different. Marcia had become distant, her attention slipping away like sand through my fingers. It started subtly, with her pulling back, a quick glance at her phone, a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Nights that she once spent curled up beside me, watching TV or chatting about our days, turned into late-night phone calls or work projects that kept her occupied long past midnight. I'd often wake up to find her still glued to her phone in the living room, or worse, I'd hear her come back to bed in the dead of night, moving quietly as if she was trying not to wake me. I didn't know when the doubts began, perhaps the first time she snapped at me for asking about her day or the night she came home late without any explanation. Maybe it was a dozen small things adding up. Whatever it was, my gut twisted whenever I looked at her, something deep inside telling me that the woman I knew, the woman I loved, was slipping away. Still, I tried to ignore the growing unease. After all, we had two kids, and I didn't want to disrupt their lives over my own suspicions. We were a family, and I kept telling myself that every couple went through rough patches. Marcia had started a new role at her company, and the stress was noticeable. She'd told me that her boss was on her case, that the workload was increasing, that her job had shifted in ways she hadn't expected. It seemed reasonable enough, and I wanted to be the supportive husband, the one she could lean on through tough times. But as the weeks passed, her behavior grew stranger. She would return from late-night meetings, with a rush of energy, her cheeks flushed, her hair slightly mussed, the scent of perfume stronger than it had been in the morning. She'd joke, sometimes nervously, about how exhausted she was, about how difficult work had become, but her eyes told a different story, a look that I couldn't quite place. And then, there were the excuses. She was meeting an old friend, or she had to stay behind for an important call. The explanations became more frequent, less convincing, and always tinged with something I couldn't define. Then came the night I couldn't ignore it anymore. Marcia had fallen asleep on the couch, her phone clutched loosely in her hand. I should have walked away. I should have let it go, told myself I was being paranoid. But something about the way she gripped that phone, even in her sleep, drew me to it like a moth to a flame. I reached for it slowly, my heart pounding as I glanced down at the screen. And then, there it was, a text notification lighting up the screen, bold and unmissable. "Can't wait to taste you again tomorrow, baby," it read, followed by a kiss emoji. It was from someone named N from accounting. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach, knocking the wind out of me. My hand shook as I read it over and over, hoping I'd somehow misinterpreted it, that I was wrong. But no matter how hard I tried, the reality was unchanging, staring back at me in that single message. My mind reeled, each thought sharper and more painful than the last. She was cheating on me. My wife, the woman I'd trusted with my heart, my life, my family, had betrayed me. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing through every moment, every memory we'd shared. The anniversaries, the vacations, the laughter over breakfast on lazy weekends. It all seemed to shatter, each piece falling away to reveal the lies beneath. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to confront her right then, to wake her up and demand answers. She looked so peaceful, so unaware of the storm brewing inside me. For the first time, I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. I stumbled back to our bedroom, my heart heavy with betrayal, and lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. I wanted to scream, to wake her up and demand an explanation, but part of me held back, afraid of what I'd hear, of what I'd have to face. My mind raced, memories flashing before me, small moments now tinged with doubt and disbelief. The next morning, I went about my routine, mechanically going through the motions, barely able to meet her gaze. She laughed over breakfast with the kids, her voice carrying the warmth I'd always loved, but it felt hollow now, a cruel reminder of the life we'd built on a foundation that was beginning to crumble. The kids were oblivious, their laughter filling the room, and I envied them for their innocence, for their belief that everything was still perfect. Days turned into weeks, each one marked by a gnawing tension I couldn't escape. I tried to gather the strength to confront her, to ask her directly about what I'd seen, but every time I tried, something held me back. I was terrified of the answer, of confirming what my heart already knew. So, instead, I watched, waiting for more clues, more signs of her betrayal, as though I needed additional proof to make the heartbreak real. Then, one afternoon, I found myself in our bedroom, looking through our closet. I don't know what I was searching for, answers, perhaps, or a way to make sense of the chaos inside me. I came across an old photo album tucked away on the top shelf, dusty and forgotten. I pulled it down and opened it, flipping through the photos of us in happier times, our wedding day, the birth of our children, the vacations we'd taken. The faces staring back at me were strangers, smiling and blissfully unaware of the heartache that lay ahead. I closed the album, the weight of it pressing down on me, and stared out the window, wondering how we'd ended up here. I'd done everything right, hadn't I? I'd been faithful, supportive, patient. I'd worked late to provide for our family, taken on extra responsibilities, put her needs above mine. And yet, it wasn't enough. Nothing I'd done had been enough to keep her from straying, from seeking comfort in the arms of someone else. The realization hit me like a cold slap in the face. Marcia wasn't the woman I thought she was. The life we'd built wasn't as solid as I'd believed. And for the first time, I understood that I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. It was time to confront her, to demand answers, to lay bare the betrayal that had been festering in the shadows of our marriage. But even as I steeled myself for what lay ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life, my future, everything I'd worked so hard to build, was slipping through my fingers. And the woman I loved, the woman I'd trusted with everything, was the one pulling it all apart. I kept thinking I'd wake up from this nightmare, that somehow I'd misread that message, that there was a reasonable explanation. But each time I looked at Marcia, the memories of those texts flooded back, a heavy reminder of everything that was slipping away. I couldn't pretend anymore. I had to confront her, to look her in the eyes and ask her what was really going on. The longer I waited, the more the suspicion gnawed at me, eating away at every good memory, every moment we'd shared over the years. One night, after I put the kids to bed, I found Marcia sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I entered, her face a mix of surprise and discomfort. The air was thick with tension, the silence between us heavier than any words I could think to say. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding as I sat down across from her, steeling myself for the conversation I'd been dreading. "Marcia," I began, my voice wavering slightly. "Is there something you need to tell me?" She frowned, looking genuinely puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I found a message on your phone," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "A message from someone named N from accounting." Her face paled, and for a split second, I saw the guilt flash across her eyes before she masked it with a look of practiced innocence. "What message?" she asked, her tone defensive, almost challenging me to press further. "The one that said, 'Can't wait to taste you again tomorrow, baby,'" I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. I watched her carefully, searching for any sign that this was some terrible misunderstanding, that there was some logical, innocent explanation. But Marcia simply stared back at me, her expression a mix of guilt and defiance. She sighed, looking down at her hands. "It's not what you think, James." "Then what is it?" I demanded, unable to keep the frustration and hurt from seeping into my voice. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty clear. I need to know the truth, Marcia. Just be honest with me. She hesitated, her fingers nervously twisting the fabric of her sweater. It was a mistake, she finally whispered. I don't even know how it happened. I never meant for any of this to go so far. I sat back, the words sinking in, each one a fresh wound. A mistake. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. This wasn't a forgotten anniversary or a missed dinner. This was betrayal. She'd crossed a line, shattered the trust that had been the foundation of everything we'd built. How long? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked away, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and sadness. A few months, she admitted, her voice trembling. It started as, just conversations. I felt, lonely, I guess. You've been so busy with work, with the kids. And he listened. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my anger in check. I've been busy because I thought we were working towards something. I thought I was doing everything I could for our family, for you. And this is how you repay me. It wasn't like that, she insisted, her voice rising defensively. I felt neglected, James. You were never around, always working late, always putting everything else before me. That's not fair, I replied, my voice filled with hurt and frustration. I've done everything I could for you, for our family. I was here, Marcia. You're the one who decided that wasn't enough. She looked away, silent, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes. But then she squared her shoulders, a hard look settling over her face. You're right. I made a choice, and I'll live with the consequences. But I didn't think it would hurt you like this. I thought we could move past it. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in the quiet room. Move past it? You think we can just forget this ever happened? Marcia, you lied to me. You betrayed me. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. She bit her lip, her hands trembling as she twisted them in her lap. I'm sorry, James, she whispered, tears filling her eyes. I don't know what else to say. I never wanted to hurt you. Her words hung in the air, a mixture of apology and resignation that left me feeling hollow. I wanted to believe her, to forgive her, to somehow put this all behind us. But the betrayal was too fresh, too raw, and I couldn't shake the image of her with someone else, sharing the moments that should have been ours. The days that followed were a blur of tension and silence. Marcia tried to carry on as if nothing had happened, going through the motions of our daily routine. She was attentive, almost overly so, as if trying to make up for what she'd done. But I couldn't bring myself to look at her the same way. Every time she smiled, every time she reached out to touch me, I felt a pang of resentment, a reminder of the betrayal that had changed everything. One night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to escape the thoughts racing through my mind. I felt trapped, torn between the love I'd once had for her and the anger that now filled every corner of my heart. I couldn't go on like this, pretending that everything was fine, that we could somehow patch up the shattered pieces of our life and move on. I needed space, time to figure out what I wanted, what I was willing to forgive. So, the next morning, I made a decision. As Marcia poured coffee, her gaze meeting mine across the kitchen counter, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. I think I need some time away, I told her, my voice calm but firm. I need space to think, to figure out what I want. I can't just pretend that everything is okay. Her face fell, her eyes widening in a mixture of surprise and fear. James, please, I know I messed up. But we can work through this. We have a family. I don't want to lose you. I shook my head, feeling a surge of anger rise up within me. It's not that simple, Marcia. You broke something between us, something I don't know if we can ever get back. I need time to figure out if I can even look at you without seeing him, without thinking about what you did. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words died on her lips. She looked at me, her expression filled with a desperation that I couldn't bring myself to feel. I'd loved her once, more than anything, but that love had been tainted, poisoned by the lies and deceit that had taken root in our marriage. I packed a bag that morning, ignoring her pleading looks and her whispered apologies. I couldn't stay here, not when every room, every shared memory, felt like a reminder of the life we'd lost. I told her I'd be staying with a friend for a while, that I needed time to think. She tried to stop me, her hand reaching out to grasp mine, but I pulled away, the touch too painful, too raw. As I walked out the door, a heavy silence settled over us, a silence filled with all the things we'd never be able to say. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness, a hollow ache in my chest as I closed the door behind me, leaving behind the life I'd once thought was unbreakable. In the days that followed, I threw myself into work, filling the empty hours with meetings, projects, anything that could distract me from the pain that lingered just beneath the surface. Friends reached out, offering support, but I brushed them off, unwilling to share the details of what had happened. It felt too raw, too personal, something that I needed to process alone. Every night, I'd lie awake, haunted by memories of Marcia, of the life we'd built together, of the betrayal that had shattered it all. I wanted to hate her, to push her out of my mind completely, but the love I'd once felt for her refused to let go, clinging to the edges of my heart like a ghost I couldn't exorcise. The days turned into weeks, and each one brought a fresh wave of clarity and pain. Living alone, without the weight of Marcia's presence, gave me the space I needed to process the anger, the hurt, and, perhaps most painfully, the emptiness that had taken root where my love for her used to be. I threw myself into work, volunteering for new projects, taking on long hours, and even venturing out with colleagues I'd never thought of as friends before. Anything that could fill the void. I was staying with my old friend Eric, who had been through his own rocky marriage years back. He was one of the few people I felt comfortable enough to open up to about what had happened. He listened without judgment, letting me rant when I needed to, offering advice when I asked, and sometimes, just letting the silence sit heavy between us. One evening, after a grueling day at work, I sat on the couch, nursing a beer, my mind drifting back to Marcia's confession. I replayed it in my head, trying to make sense of it, wondering if I could have done something differently, if there was a way I could have saved our marriage before it unraveled. I was lost in thought when Eric sat down next to me, handing me another beer. "You look like you could use one more of those," he said with a half smile. I chuckled, taking the bottle from him. "Yeah. Thanks, man. I don't know if I'll ever get used to this." He nodded, his expression understanding. "I've been there, remember? You don't get over it, you just learn to live with it. But there's one thing I can tell you, you can't keep punishing yourself for what she did." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I know. But it's hard not to feel like I failed, somehow. Like I wasn't enough." "You were enough, James. She's the one who made that choice. Not you," Eric said firmly. "Don't carry her guilt. It'll only weigh you down." I nodded, appreciating his words, even if they didn't entirely sink in. Every fiber of my being wanted to believe that I hadn't failed, that Marcia's betrayal wasn't my fault. But part of me kept circling back, wondering if I could have done more, if there were signs I missed, opportunities I'd let slip by. The next few days passed in a blur. Work continued to consume my time, but I'd catch myself reaching for my phone, nearly dialing Marcia's number before stopping myself. I was torn, unsure if I wanted to give her another chance or if I needed to walk away completely. The thought of seeing her again, of hearing her voice, both comforted and tormented me. But I knew that if I were to confront her, I'd need to be prepared for whatever came next. One Friday evening, I found myself standing outside the house we'd shared, my heart pounding as I tried to steady my breathing. The kids were with Marcia's sister for the weekend, so it was just her inside. I hadn't told her I was coming, afraid that she might try to talk me out of it or put up some kind of pretense. I wanted honesty, raw, unfiltered honesty, and I didn't think I'd get that if she had time to prepare. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Moments later, Marcia opened it, her eyes widening in surprise. She looked worn, as though the weeks had taken their toll on her, too. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sympathy, remembering the woman I'd loved, the mother of my children, and how, despite everything, part of me still cared. "James," she said softly, stepping back to let me in. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know," I replied, stepping inside and glancing around the familiar living room. It felt strange to be here again, in a place that had once been my sanctuary, now tainted by betrayal. "I wanted to talk. I need answers, Marcia." She nodded, her face somber as she gestured for me to sit down. We settled across from each other, the silence stretching between us, heavy and uncomfortable. I could see her struggling to find the words, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her sweater. "Why?" I asked, the question simple but loaded. "Why did you do it?" She looked down, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't know, James. I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. I felt lost. You were always busy, working late, focusing on everything except us. I know it sounds like an excuse, but I was lonely. And he listened. He made me feel seen." Her words stung, each one like a tiny knife, but I forced myself to listen. "You could have told me," I replied, my voice tight with emotion. "You could have said something instead of sneaking around, instead of lying to me. I would have listened, Marcia." She nodded, wiping away her tears. "I know. I was selfish. I let my own insecurities get the better of me, and I made a terrible mistake. I betrayed you, James, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. I hate what I did to you, to our family." Her confession, raw and filled with regret, stirred something inside me. I wanted to believe her, to forgive her, to somehow put the pieces back together. But the hurt was still fresh, and the trust we'd once shared felt shattered beyond repair. "Do you still love him?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop myself. It was a painful question, one I wasn't sure I wanted the answer to, but I needed to know. She shook her head vigorously. "No. No, it was never love, James. It was a distraction, an escape from my own feelings of inadequacy. I never wanted to leave you. I just wanted to feel wanted again. But it was a mistake. A huge, unforgivable mistake." I took a deep breath, her words swirling in my mind. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside me. "What are we supposed to do now?" Marcia looked at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "I want to fix this, James. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to make it right. I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, anything. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family." I studied her, the vulnerability in her eyes, the remorse etched into her face. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her a chance to prove that this was a mistake she'd never repeat. But another part of me, the part still stinging from the betrayal, wasn't sure I could ever look at her the same way again. "I don't know if I can trust you, Marcia," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "Trust isn't something you can just fix overnight. It's broken, and I don't know if it can ever be whole again." She nodded, her expression pained but understanding. "I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness right now. I know I haven't earned it. But please, James, let me try. Give me a chance to show you that I can be the wife you deserve, the mother our kids deserve." The weight of her words pressed down on me, the enormity of what she was asking settling over me. I thought of the life we'd built together, the years of love and laughter, the children we'd brought into this world. Was it worth throwing all of that away? Could I find it within myself to forgive, to let go of the anger and resentment? I stood up, the tension thickening as Marcia looked up at me, her eyes wide with hope and fear. "I need time to think," I told her, my voice steady but distant. "I can't make this decision right now. I need to figure out if I can forgive you, if we can ever get back to what we had." She nodded, her expression filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here, waiting. I won't give up on us, James." I left her standing there in the living room, her tear-streaked face a haunting reminder of the love we'd shared, now fractured and fragile. As I walked out of the house, I felt a strange sense of calm, as though a burden had been lifted. But beneath that calm was an ache, a wound that I wasn't sure would ever truly heal. The weeks that followed were marked by soul-searching and sleepless nights. I spent hours poring over memories, analyzing every detail of our relationship, every moment that had brought us to this point. I thought about our children, about what it would mean to keep our family together versus what it would mean to part ways. And slowly, a realization began to take shape. I couldn't erase what Marcia had done, couldn't undo the betrayal. But perhaps, with time, I could learn to live with it. Perhaps, there was a way forward, a way to rebuild, to create something new out of the wreckage. As the weeks stretched into months, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, Marcia and I could find a way forward. I'd kept my distance, living with Eric, taking things day by day. Every now and then, I'd meet Marcia at the house to discuss the kids or make plans, keeping everything civil but distant. She'd become softer, humbler, apologetic with every word, as if trying to prove that she could change, that we could rebuild. I'd spent countless hours weighing my options, replaying our conversations, the apologies, her attempts at making things right. The hurt was still there, but it had begun to lose its edge, replaced by a dull ache that I had learned to live with. I wanted to believe her, to believe in the life we'd built. Maybe love was stronger than betrayal. Maybe our family was worth more than the anger I'd been holding on to. Then, one night, I found myself back at the house. Marcia had invited me over for dinner, just us, no kids. She'd made my favorite meal, lasagna, fresh bread, a bottle of wine. Everything was perfect, from the soft lighting to the gentle music playing in the background. She was nervous, her hands shaking slightly as she poured the wine, and I realized that she was as scared as I was. "James," she said softly, her gaze steady but uncertain, "I just want to thank you for giving me this chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful you're even willing to try. I promise I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. "I want us to move forward, Marcia. For the kids, for us. I'm not saying everything's forgiven, but maybe we can build something new." She reached across the table, her hand touching mine, a hopeful smile forming on her face. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe we'd be okay, that maybe this chapter of pain could end, and something better could begin. The night passed in gentle conversation, laughter, memories we'd both missed. As I prepared to leave, she walked me to the door, her face illuminated by the dim porch light. She looked at me, her eyes filled with something close to relief. I thought about kissing her, making that final gesture that would bring us closer to rebuilding what we'd lost, but I hesitated. Instead, I smiled softly, nodded, and said goodnight, telling her I'd see her soon. The drive back to Eric's place was quiet, the roads empty in the late night. I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe we could heal, that our love might somehow survive. But as I approached Eric's apartment, a strange sense of unease settled over me. Something felt wrong, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The lights in his apartment were on, and I could see a figure moving inside. When I walked in, I found Eric sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, his face a mix of fear and guilt. He looked up as I entered, his eyes filled with something dark, something I couldn't immediately place. I froze, sensing that whatever was about to happen would shatter the fragile hope I'd just begun to feel. "James," he started, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something." I felt a chill run through me, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. What is it, Eric? He took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he ran them through his hair. I'm the one, James. I was the one Marcia was seeing. His words hit me like a sledgehammer, knocking the air from my lungs. I stumbled back, barely able to process what I was hearing. What did you just say? I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. I knew she was lonely, and I knew you were working so hard, and I don't know how to explain it. It was wrong, and I regret it more than you can imagine. I stood there, numb, the world spinning around me. Eric, my friend, the one who had offered me a place to stay, the one who had listened to my anger and pain, he was the one who'd betrayed me. My mind reeled, each memory we'd shared tainted, twisted by this revelation. Get out, I said, my voice barely more than a growl. Get out of my sight. James, please, he pleaded, his voice filled with desperation. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I made a mistake, a horrible, unforgivable mistake. But please, please don't throw away our friendship. I looked at him, feeling a rage deeper than anything I'd ever known. Friendship? I spat. You slept with my wife, Eric. You destroyed my family, and you have the nerve to talk about friendship? He flinched, the guilt in his eyes undeniable, but he didn't try to argue. He stood, gathered his things, and left without another word, the door closing softly behind him. I collapsed onto the couch, my mind reeling, the betrayal cutting deeper than I thought possible. The next morning, I called Marcia. She answered, her voice light, hopeful, unaware of the storm that had been unleashed. Hey, James, she said. I was just thinking about last night. I know it'll take time, but I'm really glad we're trying. I took a deep breath, letting the silence hang for a moment. How long? I finally asked, my voice cold and distant. She hesitated. What do you mean? How long was it with Eric? I said, barely able to keep the anger from seeping into my voice. There was a long pause on the other end. James. I can explain. Don't bother, I replied, my voice steady but filled with a finality that even surprised me. You could have come to me. You could have told me you were lonely, that you needed something I wasn't giving you. But instead, you went behind my back with someone I trusted. You and Eric destroyed everything we built, everything I thought we had. Her voice broke, a choked sob escaping. I know, James. I know I ruined it. I was weak, I was selfish, and I'll regret it forever. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy, a faint echo of the love we'd once shared. But it was drowned out by the weight of her betrayal, the realization that the woman I'd loved had destroyed everything I'd held dear. I'm filing for divorce, Marcia, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. It's over. I can't be with someone I can't trust. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She simply whispered, I understand, her voice filled with resignation. As I hung up, a strange calm settled over me. The anger, the pain, the betrayal, they were still there, simmering beneath the surface. But there was also a sense of closure, a finality that allowed me to let go. I'd been given the truth, however painful, and with it, the freedom to move forward, to start anew. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life, my relationship with my kids, and my sense of self. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of the betrayal threatened to crush me. But each day, I grew a little stronger, a little more certain that I'd made the right choice. In the end, I'd lost more than a marriage, I'd lost the life I'd thought I was building. But I'd gained something invaluable, a second chance to rebuild, to find a life that wasn't tainted by lies and betrayal. And with that, I finally felt a glimmer of peace, knowing that the past was behind me and that the future, however uncertain, was mine to shape.